So essentially, a group in the Netherlands pioneered approach which said that for some, a very small group of distressed young people who'd experienced their gender-related distress since childhood, and it had persisted into puberty and had intensified with puberty, who were psychologically stable and had supportive living environments, it seemed that a good treatment for them to take away that distress would be a pathway which began with puberty blockers originally from the age of 12, followed by cross-sex hormones, so testosterone for birth-registered females and estrogen for males, and then surgery at 18. And, you know, there's two main studies that set out this approach, and that is the basis for the medical treatment of young people with gender dysphoria or gender-related distress. Neither of them really, they're not that strong in themselves either, and there's been a couple of really critical papers in the last kind of year or so that have really, you know, thoroughly critiqued the two original Dutch papers. But then, so they had this very early data, and here at JIDS, you know, pressure was on them to do the same. You know, why can't we do what the Netherlands are doing? We've got distressed young people here too. And for many years, you know, and it's in the public domain, it's documented in the book, they were worried, like, well, we don't know, you know. We know that actually pausing puberty is likely to impact on bone strength, because this is a really crucial time for that. Adolescence is a time where your brain is doing all sorts of things and your sexual identity is all doing kind of things. Is it wise to pause that? And they were very open about that. But there was increased pressure, yes, from the young people themselves and their families and pressure groups, but also from other gender clinicians and also from the wider medical community. I mean, I spoke to Professor Russell Viner for the book, who led the research study that JIDS then went on to undertake. And he said, actually, you know, there was loads of pressure from our peers as well, like our other endocrinologists who didn't work in this field, who said, you know, there are consequences to not acting just as there are to acting. And, you know, followed correctly and in a research setting, like, as long as there's informed consent, this, you know, maybe you should be trying that as well.
So was it followed correctly?
Well, I think a research study was the right approach to take because, you know, that's how we advance in medicine. I mean, I'm not a medic, I'm a journalist, but that is how medicine evolves. You have to undertake research in order to gather more evidence. And people can criticise the study design for sure, but the actual approach to, you know, we don't have that much data. We've got the Dutch, but it's not overwhelming, so we need to do some of our own before we do this. That's not unsensible. But what was quite extraordinary is that they didn't really wait for any data from that study to come back before they just decided to roll it out as policy anyway.
Why did they do that? That's the question.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, there weren't any data, not proper data. I think from the public comments that the leaders of the service have made, they felt that they had it was a way of helping distressed young people. But as another clinician makes out, you know, things can be well-meaning but ill-informed. It certainly wasn't evidence-based to roll it out and to roll it out then to a different level. Wasn't that part of the scandal,
though, wasn't it? I think you say in the book, it's the lack of data, the fact that there was very, very little evidential records were kept about the treatment of the children and the outcomes.
I think it's striking that in a clinic that's run for more than 30 years, we don't really know how the 10,000 or so young people are fared. Those who are thriving, those who are not, and not just, I think, you know, there's people tend to concentrate solely on whether, you know, of the young people who've gone on to puberty blockers and or cross-sex hormones, but we don't know how those who didn't go on the physical pathway are fared either, and that's equally important. Yeah, we just don't know.
And why wasn't that data kept?
I have no idea.
Was it negligence, or what do you?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is that JIDS has had and does have a separate research team, and their clinicians have been keen to tell us about that recently in an open letter. But seemingly, but it didn't seem to collect data on how many young people they referred for physical interventions, how many they didn't, how many preserved their fertility prior to doing that, the age breakdowns of those referred for puberty blockers, how many of those who started puberty blockers then went on to cross-sex hormones, how many were referred to adult services. So they were collecting data. I'm not sure what it was on, if that's the main treatment pathway. I don't mean that sounds more facetious than I mean it to. I just, yeah.
But they were collecting data as well, weren't they, on the sort of, because it's how the actual clinic changed over the 30 years that it's been operational. I think it's quite interesting as well, isn't it? Which is part of what's happening, I think, in the world today in terms of, it started off with boys, didn't it? It started off with maybe tens of boys. And then over the years, I mean, it was extraordinary, isn't it? The sort of the acceleration in the numbers of young girls who were taken in and who showed a dysphoria, uncomfortableness with their body. And I wondered what you made of that, if that was striking.
Yeah, it's striking. I mean, there have always been girls as well. And actually, the very first case that Domenico De Celi worked with, who founded JIDS, was a girl who identified as a boy. So it's not the case that it was all boys and that's all girls. But it originally, sort of the majority would be boys whose gender distress had started in childhood. And of course there'd be girls as well. And then from sort of 2009-10 onwards, we saw sort of a radical shift in the referrals, not only this exponential increase in the overall numbers, but also a complete shift in the demographics as well. So the numbers were absolutely rocketing, sort of 50% per annum from 2009, and then they doubled in 2015. But at the same time, the sex ratio completely reversed. So by 2015, we now had 2/3 female referrals. And whereas it used to be these boys who had this sort of lifelong gender dysphoria, if you like, from childhood, it was now girls, but girls whose gender-related distress had predominantly only started in adolescence. So it was a complete shift. And the evidence base, albeit very limited, tended to apply to the former and not to the latter. But JIDS, as I think every single clinician I spoke to, said that, they applied an evidence base to a completely different group of people. And that is something that, Polly Carmichael, who's led the service since 2009, and Bernadette Wren have been open about with Parliament. They said, these are not the people of the Dutch protocol.
And so they didn't know how to treat them, basically.
Well, they thought they say that we can see the benefits in applying this to, we think it's good to extend it to a group of people for which we don't know, as long as we're careful.
That was a mistake, then, do you think, according to the evidence that you've collected? Or is it part of just the society that we're in at the moment? How that's changing?
It's quite extraordinary that 2015 parliamentary session, when the vast majority of the select committee are of the view that JIDS is far too cautious. And,
Tell us about that.
Well, just that, there's Bernadette Wren sitting alongside Susie Green from Mermaids, and somebody else who I now can't think of. But, there are several MPs on there saying, well, why don't you lower the age at which, cross-sex hormones can be administered, and why don't you go faster? So, there genuinely was pressure on the JIDS leadership from some to go further and faster, and some to not do it at all. There was that pressure. Were they right to do it? I think what was striking is that when data did start coming back from their own study, albeit they'd now rolled this out as policy, that didn't give them pause for thought, because that data from 2016 showed that actually they weren't seeing the results of the Dutch. There was no improvement in these young people who'd gone on the blocker. And in that early data, some had actually got worse.
And so why did they continue? Is it just sheer pressure of numbers, or? the political pressure will
I think it's complicated. You know, there's all sorts of reasons. I think, you know, that at that point, the referrals were going through the roof, and there just wasn't the time to adequately think about what was going on. There wasn't time to think for the clinicians working in the service and to properly reflect on what was happening. I mean, you have to ask the question of where NHS England were at this time.
That's interesting in the book as well, is it? They come in for...
Well, you know, they commissioned a service and allow it to roll out a policy in 2014, which was quite striking. You know, without demanding to see any data.
Do you have any answers as to any inclination? And nobody who you spoke to in the book, what conclusions did they come from with that? NHS.
Well, I think, like most things in life, it's cock up over conspiracy. I don't think it's you know, I think my understanding is from talking to, you know, health sources in NHS England, that they just, you know, specialist commissioning, of which GIDS is one tiny part, encompasses, you know, many, many different things, and they weren't paying attention to it because the NHS is a massive beast. I mean, it wasn't, we're purposely not looking at this. I've had no suggestion of that, but it is striking that, you know, that decision seemingly went through without any real scrutiny. And then, you know, and as time went on and referrals were exploding, it was clear GIDS couldn't cope. Some extraordinary decisions, really, from NHS England.